I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. Thank you for joining us for these lessons on state public record laws and the Federal Freedom of Information Act. This is the fourth round of lessons that all build on one another. First, we discuss the law itself, what it covers and how it can be used. Then, we invited a local journalist to share 3 specific requests they made and the stories that resulted. Our previous round of lessons focused on the appeals process, what to do when your request is denied. And now we again have a local journalist to share their experience using the appeals process to obtain records for their reporting. Links to all videos, as well as other valuable information, can be found at nefac.org/FOI guide. This round of lessons is brought to you by NEFAC with support from the Rhode Island Foundation, the SPJ Foundation, MuckRock, SPJ New England, and the New England Society of News Editors. Thank you again for joining us. Now, here's NEFAC's Emily Sweeney to introduce you to your instructor.
Hi, everybody. I'm Emily Sweeney from the Boston Globe, and I want to thank you all for joining us for this webinar, which is part of our ongoing series on public records laws. This session, we're going to focus on how newsrooms have used the public records appeals process to fight for information in New Hampshire. And with us today is Mark Hayward. He's a reporter and columnist at the New Hampshire Union Leader, and he's going to talk to us about his own personal experience with appealing for public records. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm happy to be here with the New England First Amendment Coalition to detail a public records request and an appeal that we did a few years ago at the New Hampshire Union Leader. First, let me tell you about myself. I have about 35 plus years of experience in reporting. Right now, I'm a hybrid reporter columnist for the New Hampshire Union Leader. I've spent most of my career at the New Hampshire Union Leader, but I've also worked at newspapers in Maine and North Carolina. I've received several awards from the New Hampshire Press Association and the New England Better Newspaper Competition. And we've also received at the Union Leader, with the Union Leader and myself together, we've received some recognition for our First Amendment work from the New England Better Newspaper Competition. So we're going to go on a right to know journey. I'm going to report about an arrest that took place in 2018. I'm going to tell you about the initial reporting at the Union Leader and a couple other news organizations. I'm going to detail my public records requests. There was rejections, and then some follow-up reporting, the court fight, and I shouldn't have put victory in there. I'm sorry, spoiler alert. I'm in my 4th decade as a reporter, and I routinely use right to know and freedom of information requests as part of my job. That's because I think a good reporter will go beyond go beyond the press release or the soundbite from a news conference to find out what's really going on. Public records are one way of doing so, but they're by all means not the only way of doing so. So this is a press release that the Manchester Police released on September 25th, 2018. The police reported that a man named Clifford Editafume was arrested at the Manchester Public Library. For me as a reporter, there were a couple red flags in this release. He was arrested in a public building. He's a public citizen. The public building was open at the time. And in the past, I've written about cities that have gotten sued when they arrested someone for being on public property, right? So I was a little curious in this. It said he engaged in a brief struggle and they used a taser to subdue him. They said he had no fixed address, which is the euphemism for that he was homeless. And also curious, what I found most curious in the press release, they seemed like they had to point out his height. Now he is pretty tall, right? But as far as I could tell, the height had nothing to do with his trespassing or his arrest, right? And when police put out press releases, sure, they have to identify people by name, they usually put out a mugshot, which with name and the mugshot, you got a pretty good idea of gender. They usually give an age for reasons of identification to make sure you have the right Mark Hayward, who's 63 years old and not the 36-year-old one. But then they don't talk about sexual orientation or religion or ethnicity. So I was kind of curious about why they thought they had to say how tall Clifford was. But maybe we'll find out. They also said that he repeatedly kicked the officer's knee. This was our initial coverage, and I believe I rewrote that press release. Every once in a while, we have to rewrite press releases. I purposely didn't put in his height, but I did, and I didn't do any additional calls. If he were in jail, it would be hard to get a hold of him. And a lot of times newspapers just repeat what they're fed by the government or the police or whoever giving them a press release. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing additional work. WMUR also reported on it. So I was concerned about the arrest itself. I wanted to see if I could verify some aspects of the police department account of the arrest. What was his resistance like? Why did they have to tase him? Why was he not supposed to be there in the first place? Was there a disruption? All of this is because I believe the public should know about the job performance of its employees and the actions that take place in a public setting. And what better way to answer all these questions but with a security cameras, right? So I want to digress just for a little bit because I'm an old guy, and this is what happens when you have old guys give a presentation. They want to talk about what it was like back in the old days. When I first started in journalism, most of our public access focused on meetings, right? There were a lot more reporters back then, a lot more newspapers, and everyone went to, you had a reporter all the time at a selectmen's meeting or a city council meeting or a planning board meeting. And sometimes they would get together and they decided we don't want them reporting on what we're going to, on this controversial issue. So they go behind closed doors. Well, we would think that we deserved to be there and they shouldn't shut us out. We'd go to court and we'd file a motion. The judge would usually rule in our favor, but it would usually be a Pyrrhic victory because they already got together, they already said everything, and they made their decision. And so now, because of different changes mostly in the journalism world, and there are fewer newspapers and fewer reporters, we don't go to many meetings, right? And so we rely much more on public records, right? There are so many public records that a city or a town or a government agency will have. Records about meeting minutes, right? Contracts, payment records, including invoices, salaries, right? Fines and inspections, licenses, demand letters, lawsuits, they go on. And these are the things now that most reporters look for when it comes to, and where most of the issues arise when it comes to public access. So I initially emailed the library director and asked her if they had a security camera and told her I was looking for the footage. I merely asked if they had the cameras and said, I'd like to know the footage. I didn't cite the chapter and verse for the right to know law, which I usually do. And this was the same day of the arrest. And she emailed back and said, yes, they do have security cameras, and they have a policy. And according to the policy, only the library staff can have access to the cameras, and police can get it with a subpoena or a court order. This got me fired up a little because I believe the footage, why wouldn't it be a public record? The system that's used to record it is probably paid for with public funds, and they're recording stuff that took place in a public place. So my first request I sent to, and it was a pretty easy right to know request because I knew exactly what I wanted. A lot of times as a reporter, I usually know what I want, but I don't know what they have. So I'll use the phrase, I want any and all records you might have for regarding an arrest of someone, let's say, right? I knew specifically what I wanted this time. I said I wanted the video images from your security cameras that would have captured the confrontation between police and Clifford, and I gave the date. I cited, like I usually do, the New Hampshire right to know law. I CC'd the city solicitor. In Manchester they call it city solicitor, but it's the on-staff attorney for the city, and my supervisors, as well as Greg Sullivan, who's the lawyer who works for the paper on right to know matters. And it includes my boilerplate, which is something along the lines of this, as you know, this request triggers several responsibilities and deadlines on your part. I don't say what they are. I kind of figured they'll have to go look them up. I do this so it kind of puts the ball in their court to let them know that the next step is theirs and they have to take some action. Okay, so within a day or two, I got their initial response, which was saying, we've received your right to know request. In New Hampshire, the law says in 5 days, they have to respond to a right to know request. Now, the response can be as simple as, someone sends you an email and you say, thanks very much. That can be their initial response. They just have to acknowledge that they received it. Now, sometimes officials, especially if it's smaller towns that aren't used to the right to know request, they'll think that the law where it says response means they have to comply and give me everything I want within 5 days. And that's great when they think that. I certainly don't correct them on that. But the substantive response that I had came 6 days after I made my request. And of course, it was a rejection. But still, it was relatively quickly. They said, we're not going to release it. And they cite one of the exemptions to the right to know law that says that personnel, medical, welfare, library user, video rental, and other files whose disclosure would constitute an invasion of privacy, those are exempt under the right to know law. Exempt meaning they don't have to disclose the information. They said, at this point, the Manchester Public Library is not going to release the footage because doing so would create a significant risk of violation of the arrestee's right to privacy. Now, this is ridiculous, I think, in a couple ways. Arrests are public, right? And the same city government that like 6 days earlier decided that it was so important to let the whole world know that they arrested someone and let people know even his height, is now telling me that it would be an invasion of privacy to let people see the video of the arrest, right? So anyways, we had that rejection and that didn't stop me. I just started to do some traditional reporting. I had no access, or I had no resistance going to the courthouse and looking up files of other arrests that he may have been involved in. And sure enough, he had some other recent arrests that were pretty similar to the libraries, right? He was, a couple times he was arrested in the hospital. He said he was cold. He didn't want to leave. The cops told him to leave and they tased him and he left, right? Also, a name came up when I started going through his court records, and this name came up, Evelyn Max. So I'm just going to mention that for this time. So right to know request number 2. So 2 days after they rejected my initial right to know request, I filed a second request, and I got to admit, the rejection got me upset, and I wanted to give a little pushback. So I asked for the subpoena or court order that prompted them to turn the video over to the police, right? I asked for any letter that they would have given Clifford to tell him that he was trespassed and he couldn't be in the property, right? And then I got a little snarky and I said, did a lawyer familiar with the right to know law have input in your security camera policy? So that's like, you know, you can't file a right to know law request with a question, right? They're not obligated to answer your questions under the right to know law, and they're also not obligated to create a document that they don't have. But I, you know, like I said, I was being a little snarky because this was going to be an ongoing issue. So I felt like, you know, a lot of times if you get a lot of records, so what, you still want to get the real story. So I wanted to find Clifford Editafume. So I found a cell phone number for him in court records. I called him up. He was living in a homeless shelter in Nashua, which is about 20 minutes away from Manchester. He said I could come down and talk to him, and we discussed at length his situation. He was most upset that his car got towed. You know, when you get arrested and you're poor, so many terrible things happen to you. And one of the things is you can lose your job, you can lose your apartment, but you know, if your car was parked you know, where a meter is and the meter's expired, eventually it's going to get towed, right? And that happened to him. He was living in the shelter and he couldn't get to his car, which had some clothes. He said it had money in it and all sorts of things, right? So, so we talked about a lot of things. And since I was there, right, I said, well, Clifford, they don't want me to see the video of you getting arrested. Would you like sign something to say that it'd be okay? And he said, sure. And so I wrote it out. That's a reporter's, you know, those skinny reporter's notebooks. I wrote out something saying that it's fine for the union leader to get the copy, to have a copy of the surveillance photo. He signed it, dated it, and I had the shelter manager witness it. So I sent a JPEG of the piece of paper to the city solicitor, and I said, you know, I noted that he had signed it and said that it was fine for him to, for us to see it, and that eliminated the argument about his privacy rights. So what do you think happened? She said, still refused to do it. And she said his competency might be an issue, which I got to admit was a pretty good legal move on their part. How can he consent to this release if he's not mentally competent? But then she also said that his case had not been resolved, kind of saying we're not going to release it at this time because the case had not been resolved. And this is one of a problem that I see once in a while when public records requests is they'll say, well, there's an investigation going on or there's a court case going on, so you can't have access to the public records. And I always say, no, if it was a public record before the arrest, it's still a public record now. There's nothing that depublicizes records. But she didn't listen to me on this one. This story ran a couple days after that rejection, and actually, this is the best story that to come out of this whole thing, and that was before I got access to the surveillance video. It turned out that Clifford was a victim of human trafficking. He and about 75 people were brought from Nigeria to North Carolina, you know, with promises of basketball stardom, NBA, NCAA tournament, and most of them, their hoop dreams foundered. And in his case, he ended up living in a car and working at the local McDonald's and getting tased when he wouldn't leave the hospital library because he didn't have anywhere else to go. It's a very sad story. And then as a companion piece to that, we ran an article that points out that the city is refusing to release the surveillance video. We say the cops have it, but the public doesn't, and Clifford wants it to be seen. We pointed out that the library gave it to police without a court order or subpoena and violating their own policy, but the Emily Rice, the city solicitor, said that wasn't the point. And I found an American Library Association official who said that, well, yeah, records of what you and I, materials, what we take out of the library, that's usually protected in most state right to know laws, but security videos are not. Most libraries have security videos, and they realize that they're available to the public. So where are we here? So eventually, with the city's refusal to release a security video, we do what you have to do in New Hampshire and in most places. We have to appeal it to the Superior Court. We asked a judge to order the release of the video. The union leader's attorney, Kathleen Sullivan, she provided a strong argument. How the Manchester police deal with someone who has mental health issues, who may be mentally incompetent, who is homeless, is exactly what the public has a right to see. Emily Rice in court said, what we're talking about is whether or not the public has a right to observe the arrest of a homeless, mentally ill victim of human trafficking in the library when his case is still pending. The answer is no. To the extent the public has a right to know, the public already knows a lot about it. And that last sentence, that's, just think about that. She's saying, well, you already know enough, so you don't need to know more. I don't, that kind of, under her way of thinking, it's up to them to decide how much we should know about something. Recently, there was a right to know decision in the city of Nashville, and I mean, like within the last couple of weeks, and it was from this gadfly in the city, and she wanted filed for information about an issue that had been thoroughly covered, and the judge, in ruling in her favor and actually giving her attorney fees because he found the city shouldn't have delayed, shouldn't have refused her. He said, there's probably not much here, but that's too bad. She gets to see it if it's a public record. So this order came the following day, and it was a win for our case. I will say our reporting said that the video corroborated most of what the police said. And that basically was a non-story. Gregory Sullivan, who's very active, a lawyer who's very active with First Amendment Coalition, he says that oftentimes I've heard him say that we don't know what's in a public records request when we make it, and we don't make it. Sometimes we find out that the government officials were doing exactly what they should have been doing, and we'll report on that too. And that's about what this article says. But still, there were two important outcomes. One is that the city never contested the notion that a public surveillance videos are public records. I really like that because videos are becoming more a part of the societal record, and it's important that we have access to those videos. Think of all the public surveillance videos, publicly funded surveillance videos. They're in parks, they're in city hall plazas, they're in streets, parking garages, lobbies of city halls and other buildings. But what was more important is this idea of privacy trumps public records. And here is what Judge Larry Smuckler said. The public has a broad interest in the manner in which public employees are carrying out their functions. Here's specifically how ongoing Manchester police officers engage with a member of the public before and during effectuating an arrest. CE's privacy interest is less compelling. While there is a stigma in facing criminal charges, the charges and the underlying factual allegations are already part of the public record. This arrest itself was effectuated in the public area of the public library. That's a strong ruling. I wish it was from an appeals court because it's only in one little case, but we were happy with that. It was a strong ruling.
Mark, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story with us.